Alrighty, hello. My name's Xavier Liu. I'm one of the Interp coaches here at Bellarmine College Prep. And today our video is going to be all about blocking. This is part B or part two of the first part of blocking. And we'll be talking today on objects, reactions, and transitions. So without further ado, let's get started. Alrighty, so our first thing that we're going to be talking about is object positioning and placement. In many parts of your interp, you will be reacting or interacting with objects. For example, you could be picking up cups, bottles, cutting vegetables with knives, folding clothes, etc. We create these objects through space. How do we mold our hands or our body to hold the objects, right? Are our fingers relatively clasped close together? Are our hands more open as if we were holding them in the palms of our hands? Shape. What is the object shaped like? Does it have a handle that you can grab or grasp onto? Is the object more flat, like a book or a map or like a rock? Is the object round, like a bowl? Size. How big is the object that we're holding? Unlike the real world, size matters here. So, is this a large object that you need both hands to carry, or is it like a tiny pebble that you can hold in the palm of your hand? The five senses react to the object, right? Is the object hot? Is the object cold, sharp, dull, heavy, light, smelly, toxic, etc., etc.? The list goes on and on. What's super important about object positioning and placement is that you keep your objects clean and clear, right? Now, what do I mean by this? Essentially, I mean that I should not be confused at what object you have in your hands or what you're doing with the object, or how you're holding the object, or what the object is looks like or is shaped like at any given time in your speech. It needs to be super clear about what the object is, as well as what the object looks like, as well as how you're holding the object. All of that needs to be super, super, super clear. We talk or I will talk a lot about consistency throughout this lecture today. The shape of your object should not change from one scene of your speech to another, right? An object is considered opaque or solid unless you make it explicitly clear that it's not. So, for example, if something is melting in your hand, right, that perhaps that piece of plastic or um, uh, perhaps like a book that is burning in your hands, right? Watching things crumble, then you can start changing your shape. Otherwise, the shape of that object is opaque and solid. Otherwise, unless you make that explicitly clear to your audience and to your judge. If you pick up something, change the shape of your hands to show that it's in your hands now. And similarly, when you let go of an object, you want to make sure that your hand reflects that, right? So if you're holding a knife in your hands and you let go of that knife because someone just knocked at the door and you need to go open the door now, make sure that you physically let go of a knife prior to going and grabbing the doorknob. Remember that an object can't just mysteriously disappear from your hands. So again, taking that same example, when you go and grab the doorknob, you can't also be holding the knife at the same time unless you were a murderer and you planned to murder the person coming at you or knocking at your door. So make sure that you actually let go of the knife prior to opening the doorknob, or using any or picking up another object. Objects in the room or in the space that you create will be in that same space unless you move them. So, for example, if there are 3 chairs in the room and you sit down on one of them and, again, you hear a knock at the door, or you need to go to the bathroom or you need to do something on the other side of the room, You can't just get up and then walk through those two chairs, right? Or walk through the other chairs. You need to move them, or perhaps shift or contort your bodies in ways which show that the chair is still there. You're just moving past it. Next, placement. Again, if you pick up an object in your hand, it remains in your hand until you put it down and let go of it. Don't drop your items that you have in your hand without placing them down or explicitly disposing of them. Now, let me get this clear. You may choose to drop an object for dramatic effect, like, for example, if you were in a courtroom and you just made this huge speech and the judge or the jury still finds the defendant guilty, and you drop your pen. That's okay. You can drop certain things. We don't have an issue with that. However, what we do have an issue with is if you don't make it clear that the object has officially left your hands and is dropped. I can't count the number of times where I have coached or judged a round in which a competitor doesn't have clean blocking and is sort of just running around the room, and they didn't even notice that they forgot to put down their glass of water or something like that, right? So you need to be explicitly clear that the object is leaving your hands, and that once you pick something up, you let go of it very clearly if you want to grab something else. Next, an object is in the place where you left it until you return to that spot and pick it back up. So if you are picking up a book off a table, right, you need to make sure that if you're picking that book back up, not only do you pick it back up from the same space, but you also pick it up from the same level, right? That table shouldn't be 2 feet lower than it was when you first grabbed the book off of that table. It should be at the same plane. Think of it like that. Next, it's super important that you interact with those objects as well, right? If you need to move object X from point A to point B, you need to make sure that you're grasping at object X first, then moving it from point A to point B before letting object X go. I can't, again, count the number of times where I've been coaching or I've been judging in which a student doesn't make this explicitly clear, okay? So make sure that your objects are clean and that your placement is consistent. Next, we're going to be talking about noticing, reacting, and thinking. Couple things about this. It's super duper important that characters notice and react to their surroundings as well as what other people are saying. This makes the speech a lot more dynamic. Don't have your characters just go through the motions or the actions of a piece. You're not going to get a high rank if you do that, right? You need to be actively thinking and reacting to what the other character, or the other folks what the other characters in your piece are doing and are saying. Focus on using your movements to bring the characters to the forefront of a piece and give those characters meaning and depth through the reactions and blocking. What you don't want to be doing is, again, you don't want to be having these undynamic pieces where two people are just talking at each other. That's not a very solid piece. That's not engaging. You want to make sure that your characters are dynamic and that they are physically and emotionally interesting to look at. Next, it's super duper important that you are thinking throughout the piece. Humor and drama are a lot more effective when we let them sit and show that we're reacting with facial expressions. So again, for example, if character A says something funny, character B perhaps needs to react to that, like in some way, right? Show some disgust, show some, perhaps a burst of laughter. Whatever it is, we need to make sure that characters are reacting to each other, okay? Last but not least, we need to make sure that we keep it real. What's super duper important is that we don't overdo it, because if we start sounding really fake, not only just goes over the judge's head, but it's also very obvious, right? So we want to keep it as real as we possibly can. An example of this: let's say that you're a prisoner about to be put to death by the state. Your partner is the prison warden about to pull the lever. So this is an example of more of a duo, right? Perhaps the warden is standing off to the side, right? It's steely-eyed, flat, neutral facial expressions, and asks for final words. The prisoner flinches as he struggles against the straps, and he realizes that it's his final minutes of his life. Perhaps the prisoner speaks in this broken speech pattern, near tears maybe even, and tilts their head towards the ceiling to indicate that they're done talking. And perhaps we put in this longer pause. Then the warden nods his head when the prisoner is done. This is the warden reacting to the prisoner, and then gets ready to pull the lever, right? And perhaps even then we can show that the prisoner is again reacting to this, right? Like perhaps the prisoner is closing their eyes, getting ready for death to take them, or something like that, right? Have your characters react to each other. It's a lot more interesting when pieces do this. Next, we're just going to finish up this presentation or finish up this lecture by talking about transitions and builds. Transitions between characters. As we mentioned in our previous, or part 1 of the first part of blocking, we can do this through a pop or a morph, right? So pops are usually done for humorous pieces, morphs more so for dramatic pieces. Transitions between scenes, some examples of these, perhaps 180-degree turns where you face the audience and then you transition by turning towards your back, so your back is now facing towards the audience. A noise transition or a musical transition, right? So for example, some duos will have a specific tune that they hum or that they sing together to transition from one scene to another. That's another example of a transition. Morphs, right? Morphs are another great way to transition in between scenes. Sometimes characters will slowly sort of morph from one scene to the other. So for example, there have been a couple speeches in which a student will have morphed from the aftermath of a school shooting to perhaps back in the classroom a couple years later, narrating to us. That's another example of a transition. Or you can just simply sort of break back out into a neutral position. What this sort of looks like is sort of the transition to from like a teaser to an intro, where you break out and you just stand back still and you're in a more neutral position. That's another example of a transition. Use blocking to help you build. Building is very important. We want to make sure that our emotions don't sound like we're going from 0 to 100 really quickly. So use your blocking to help you build. Humorous pieces perhaps get more dynamic as you build, more physicality, more emotional. Dramatic pieces use pauses, stillness, more frantic gestures, reactions to demonstrate climax as a way to build from perhaps the inciting incident and through the rising action towards the climax, right? Lastly, use intensity. Remember that being loud isn't intense, right? We can have someone who is loud and not intense. So for example, if someone's just screaming at you the entire time, that's not intense. That's just being loud, right? What we're looking for is that intensity, that gut sort of feeling that pushes those emotions to the forefront of a piece. That's what you want as a strong build, and blocking can get you there. Like, you know, for example, like I just mentioned with the example previously with the dramatic pieces, right? Use the gestures, the reactions, perhaps stillness or pauses to demonstrate that intensity and to build that intensity. Use physicality in those humorous pieces to build that intensity. So that's it for this video. That was part 2 of the first part of blocking. Next up, we're going to have part 2 of blocking, as well as part 3 of blocking. So make sure you check those videos out. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out to your coach, reach out to your peers, as well as reach out to your captains. All of these are great resources for you to turn to if you ever need help. That's it for this video. Check in with part 2 later.